We've spent 10 episodes building an elaborate cosmic architecture, Ein Sof and mentalism, Adam Kadmon and correspondence, living letters and vibration, Chesed and Gevurah and polarity, the sabbatical cycles and rhythm, providence and cause and effect, the Shekhinah and gender, the Noahide law standing beneath the 613, and the real history of how this architecture moved through the world. Today, I want to ask the only question that ultimately matters. So what? What is any of this for if it does not change how a person actually lives? This is not a modern anxiety about practical spirituality. It is a live rabbinic concern going back to the earliest layers of the tradition. The prophet Micah, in one of the most quoted verses in the entire Hebrew Bible, distills the whole religious obligation into a single sentence. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Not to master sephirotic diagrams, not even primarily to have correct metaphysical beliefs, to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly. Whatever cosmic architecture you hold in your head, the prophet is telling you plainly that it is validated only by what it produces in your hands. The Kabbalistic concept most people have heard of, even second-hand, is Tikkun Olam, or repair of the world. It comes to us most fully developed through Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, in 16th century Safed, and it is worth understanding precisely because the popular usage of the phrase today, often meaning something close to generic social activism, is a real but partial descendant of a much stranger and more demanding original idea. Luria taught that at the very beginning of creation, following the Tzimtzum we discussed in episode 3, divine light poured into vessels meant to contain and structure it, the shevirat, and the vessels shattered under the intensity of that light. Sparks of holiness scattered throughout the physical world, trapped in what the tradition calls the klipot, or husks, or shells of concealment. Every mitzvah or good deed performed with proper intention on this account is not merely a good deed in an ordinary ethical sense. It is understood as an act that liberates a trapped spark, restoring it to its proper place, literally repairing a structural fracture in the fabric of creation itself. This is cause and effect, correspondence, and polarity from earlier episodes, all converging into a single ethical claim. Because the human being corresponds to the cosmos, and because the cosmos operates by law-governed cause and effect, a small human action performed below genuinely produces a structural effect above. Feeding someone who is hungry is not merely nice. Telling the truth in a difficult moment is not merely principled. On this account, they are cosmic repair operations, gathering scattered light back into order. This is precisely the answer to the question I opened with today. The elaborate architecture is not decoration sitting on top of ethics. The architecture is what makes the ethics cosmically serious rather than a matter of personal preference or social convention. Kindness is not a nice to have laid on top of universal law. Kindness in this account is universal law, doing its actual work at your scale. Manly Hall himself, across decades of lecturing on esoteric philosophy to audiences with no religious grounding at all, landed again and again on essentially this same insistence in his own idiom. He was consistently suspicious of occultism practiced as private, self-enclosed knowledge, power sought for its own sake, symbols collected like trophies, initiation treated as a status marker. He argued repeatedly that the entire point of studying universal law was to become a more useful, more ethical, more integrated human being in ordinary daily life. that a person who mastered every Hermetic principle and used none of it to treat their neighbor better had missed the entire purpose of the study. That is not a peripheral aside in his work. It is close to his central thesis, restated across thousands of lectures. Wisdom that does not produce goodness is not wisdom. It is merely information. There is a specific danger worth naming plainly, because both the Jewish mystical tradition and the Hermetic tradition are aware of it and warn against it explicitly. The temptation to use elaborate metaphysical study as an escape from ordinary moral obligation rather than a spur toward it. It is entirely possible to spend years absorbed in shevirat, correspondences, and universal principles while treating the people in your actual life, a spouse, a child, an employee, a stranger, with less patience and less honesty than someone who has never opened a mystical text in their life. The tradition has a sharp word for this failure mode. Study that does not lead to ma'aseh, action or deed, is regarded in Pirkei Avot as inferior to deed accompanied by less study. Not the study is the essential thing, but the deed, the Mishnah states directly. If today's episode does anything, I want it to function as a check against exactly that failure mode. For anyone drawn into this material by genuine intellectual fascination, myself very much included. So here is the practical closing thought. Before our final episode, I want you to do one thing. Take one specific relationship in your life that has some friction or neglect in it and do one small concrete act of repair. An honest conversation, an apology, an act of unrequited kindness before we meet again. Not because it will look impressive, because if everything we have discussed in these 10 episodes, that single small act is not a footnote to universal law, it is universal law, functioning exactly as designed. Next time, in our final episode, we'll bring together the whole series and what it means to hold universal law and Torah law as one coherent picture rather than two competing claims.